For all the prosperity that a housing boom can bring, it's also made home ownership increasingly difficult to afford for many in major centres such as Toronto, Vancouver, and their surrounding areas. That's got both federal and provincial governments looking for a policy response that can balance a diversity of needs. Joining us now for a look at how it plays out in Ontario's housing market, we welcome Joe Vaccaro. He is the CEO of the Ontario Home Builders Association. Pino Dimascio, partner at Urban Strategies, Inc. Cynthia Holmes, founding chair of the Real Estate Management Department at Ryerson University. And John Lawrence, senior editor at Spacing Magazine. And it is great to welcome you two on the end back here. You two right beside me for the first time here. Two little bits of housekeeping before we get started. First of all, Cynthia Holmes, you have the perfect name for this show.
Thank you.
I mean, let's face it, you do. Second of all, in the interest of full disclosure, and we do this every time you come, Joe, my brother's a home builder, and he was, I guess, a member of the Ontario Home Builders Association for a while, or
That's right.
on the
executive.
He was on the executive, but he isn't anymore.
No.
But we put that out there for everybody's edification. Okay, let us set the table for the discussion to come here. Does Ontario, Cynthia, you first, does Ontario have an affordability problem when it comes to home ownership?
In order to purchase an average house, an average detached house in Toronto right now, you would need to have a salary, a household family salary of more than $250,000. The actual median family income is closer to $72,000. So I would say, yes, there's an affordability problem. Not to mention, many families earn much less than $72,000.
So you got to be in the 1% to make it happen, is what you're saying.
That is basically true.
Okay. John, how about you on that?
I think that there are multiple affordability problems. There's rent is an affordability issue because rents are have been increasing a lot. There's a significant affordability issue for lower income families who don't even begin to think about buying a home or a condo. So I would say that there are a number of ways of identifying the problem, but there are several problems.
We'll look into those as the half hour continues. Joe, how about your view?
Well, I mean, we look at the issue as not just affordability, but also from a housing supply perspective, right? Because as John mentioned, it really is different segments of the population looking for their housing needs. And there are challenges at different ends, on the ground-related end, as Cynthia mentioned. But I think also on the condominium side now, we're starting to see those challenges as well. Rents are creeping up higher and higher, and the price of condominiums are also going up. So across the spectrum, there are challenges.
Your turn.
Yeah, and I think the simple answer is yes. The issue isn't so simple, though, right? There's multiple factors at play. We've had about 2 decades now of rising real estate and housing costs that creates an affordability issue there. We have at the same time a growing income inequality and an income gap, which means, as John explained, for low and middle income earners, that just gets exacerbated. And then on top of that, in our urban regions, we have more intensification, we have aging population, we have newcomers coming into these regions, which all create their own issues. And that's nothing to say about homelessness, First Nations housing, or some other serious social issues that are related to housing as well.
Do we have adequate housing choices right now across the province?
I'd say no. I mean, that is really critically the big issue is we've been able to produce a lot of housing in a very short period of time over the last 20 years, but not a diversity of housing tenure, not a diversity of size of housing. And one of the big issues is not an ability to meet what young families or people that with larger households are trying to purchase.
Cynthia, if you wanted to have a strategy that took into account many different choices, given the differing needs of people across the province, what would that look like?
Well, I like the idea of more rental housing available to make sure that tenure choice is available as well. So I think that that's an important consideration. And I think that through the national housing strategy that's being developed now by the national government, they can consider how to deliver a wide variety of unit types, unit sizes, and tenure choices, owning and renting.
Joe, we hear so much about the housing situation in the capital city of this province, where the average price of a detached home is, what is it now? It's like $1.3 million or $1.4 million, something
over
like
$1 million, yeah.
Over $1 million bucks. What about outside of the Greater Toronto and Hamilton and area? What does it look like?
Well, it's a great question, and we're seeing across the board in regions like Waterloo Region and Simcoe, for example, in the Barrie area, there are challenges there.
Challenges means what?
Challenges in terms of, from our perspective, in terms of bringing new housing supply into the marketplace, and then of also the appropriate mix of housing supply options there. And so I think the conversation around the table really becomes a question of how do you increase supply so that the market can respond and hopefully alleviate some of these pressures.
So let's just understand where the challenges are. If you want to build single-family homes, There's no challenge there, is there? I mean,
Oh,
developers.
absolutely. No, absolutely.
What are the
I
big
mean,
challenges there?
Well, what you have to do is you have to work. I mean, builders will always say, we can only build where, what, and when the government lets us. We have to earn an approval. The where is obviously done through provincial policy. It's also done through official plans and zoning. The what is also done through that process, right? Are they single-family homes? Are they mixed use? Are they condominiums? That whole range. And then the when is now the new challenge. The new challenge is we've got to be able to turn on the lights, turn on the furnace, and flush the toilet. And so that when is a challenge now because you have to move that infrastructure into those areas. And that infrastructure challenge now is not just a suburban challenge. We're having challenges in our city cores, challenges at Yonge and Eglinton, challenges in different parts of this city and in Markham, for example, where moving that infrastructure into place is not happening fast enough.
Okay, that I got to follow up on. We are here at Yonge and Eglinton. I look around, there's tons of condos going up here, as have been for the last decade. Now, obviously, not too many new homes built in this area, but lots of condos. This is already pretty highly serviced, isn't it? What's the challenge of getting toilets to flush at Yonge and Eglinton?
So the first round of development in this neighborhood has happened. The second round now is being challenged by, in this case, ratepayer groups and others who are saying, without TTC service, without new capacity on the subway line, how can we permit more units to come on stream? We should put an end to that. We should put a hold on that until we can do capacity. So when I mention infrastructure, it's all those pieces working together. And so when I look at the national strategy, it talks a lot about integrating housing options, housing choice, with all these additional services like transit. And that's a challenge. And the real challenge, I think, is that it's all being dealt with at a municipal level, but it requires provincial and federal funding to make it work.
Let me follow up on the municipal angle. John, based on your reporting, based on your experience, how well do you think the various, well, you know Toronto the best, how well does Toronto City Hall do at giving the kinds of approvals in a timely fashion that his industry says it needs in order to serve a market?
Not that well, and so I've just been working on a piece for the Globe for this week on rental housing development in Toronto, and so if you ask city councillors, they want more rental housing, right? Your organization is pushing for more rental housing, but at the level of approvals, it takes just as long. There are just as many roadblocks, and this is despite the fact that this kind of housing is affordable for families. They're more family-sized units. They're all the good things. They're location efficient. So I think that as we think through the recommendations in the national strategy and sort of bringing them down to the level of individual communities, that policymakers and decision makers have to say, okay, well, I mean, what do we have too much of? And what do we have not enough of? Because acknowledging your point that the government sets the terms for how the market evolves. And as far as I see, there's way too much of one sort of development and not a sufficient amount of another sort of development that allows people to kind of get a toehold, have decent accommodation, without looking at a massive down payment.
Let me do one fast follow-up on one word that you used in that answer. I'll do it with Pino, and that word was affordable. In your mind, what does affordable mean?
I mean, affordability is simply the ability of people to have housing and not put a strain on other basic needs that they also have to meet, right?
So
And
what percentage of their income does that represent today?
Typically, that can go between 35 to 50%, right? And there are different ways of measuring it, and I've seen it measured in different ways. I think the key is when you deal with your low and middle income earners, that they maintain the ability to at least pay below 50% of that, because that helps them then meet other basic needs.
And if you were really going to have a home and pay for a home that you thought was not overly burdensome on your bottom line, what number is ideal? I mean, obviously zero is ideal, but what's reasonable? What's a reasonable amount of money to spend on shelter?
On shelter on a monthly basis?
As a percentage of your income.
I think 30 to 35% would be reasonable. We're nowhere near there. So if we get to somewhere around 40% in the Toronto region, that would be a great achievement.
Okay. In which case, we have heard earlier in the program from the Federal Housing Minister, Jean-Yves Duclos. He's got this new report out, having consulted broadly with stakeholders and Canadians from coast to coast to coast. You've had a look at the report, Cynthia?
I have. I read it multiple times.
Multiple times, okay. Your big takeaways from that report, or what?
Well, first, I think they did a great job consulting a large set of people. And I read it carefully and multiple times to try to see the hints of what they might be implementing in
You see them
strategies.
there?
Well, I looked for things they repeated multiple times and summarized at the end. And one thing I thought that was quite interesting that ties into what we're saying was the idea of a rental allowance, meaning that there would be cash paid to families that need to have a supplement to be able to afford a decent unit for their families.
So a shelter allowance type of thing.
Shelter allowance, housing supplement, rent allowance, these are the words they're saying without elaborating on the idea, but this is one idea that I see coming through. I also see ideas about how you can encourage home builders to build more units that are sustainable and affordable for the unit holders. So the idea would be some sort of land grants or lending to developers or something along those lines. Some way to help encourage home builders to build more units.
Let me pick up on the first one. Do you like the idea of a housing allowance or a shelter allowance?
Well, I like it better than the idea of giving money directly to developers, because I like the idea of having Canadian families be able to make their own decisions about where they want to live and how they want to balance their own budgets. And if there's, for example, an opportunity, an employment opportunity, having the rent allowance paid to the family would mean that the family can move to that opportunity. So it's not linked to the unit. So that's an aspect of it I like.
I don't mean to cast any aspersions on landlords here. Let me preface this next question with that. Having said that, if you knew that all of your tenants were getting a shelter allowance from the Government of Canada, why wouldn't you just knock the rent up more?
That's an excellent question. There are some regulations that keep rents at certain levels to some extent. But yes, I can see that sort of policy would create an incentive for landlords to increase their rents.
Joe, is it even possible to create a national housing strategy in this country, given that we have basically GTHA and Vancouver, which are going nuts, and everything else, which isn't?
I guess, when I read the report, what I found helpful was the use of the word partnerships. And I think that's really where we have to take this conversation. Because none of these things operate in a vacuum. New home builders are going to bring their products to market, these homes to market, these communities to market, and they're going to be priced to the market. And that's just the reality of the marketplace. So you can't ignore that reality. You can't ignore that 95% of new units are being built by the private sector. So by engaging the private sector as partners, I think that's important. But I think it's also important that, to use a phrase that's been used in Toronto a little bit, everyone needs to stay in their own lane. Ultimately, municipalities are responsible for the where and the what. And so what they really need is the help on the when, which is funding for the infrastructure they need to bring those projects forward.
Let me go over on this side of the table for some more feedback on that. Pino, if we know that according to the Constitution, housing is a provincial responsibility. We've also heard from John and from Joe about how significant the municipality's role is in trying to bring product to market. What's the federal government's job here anyway, in your view?
Well, the federal government's job is one to be responsible for meeting housing needs as they relate to affordability issues and social equity issues, I think, which is where traditionally national governments, federal governments have had a role in housing. If you look around the world, you would find all OECD countries have national housing strategies. Almost all of them spend more on housing programs than Canada does. So my big takeaway from the report, which isn't a strategy yet, but it's saying it's a discussion, and it's the federal government saying is we're ready to be at the table again, and here are some ideas that we've heard about priorities that people around the country have, and here are some ideas about how we may be able to take part in that. And I think that's a big step in a different direction than we've been in the past 15, 20 years.
But John, beyond just provinces with hands out saying, you want to help us out? Give us $25 billion. That'd be a big help. Beyond that, what's the federal government supposed to do? What's its role?
Well, I think that its role should be somewhat limited. I think that there are other elements that come into play. It's the economic policies that drive interest rates. The federal government has a great deal of land which can be put into play to allow developers, private or not-for-profits, to get involved. We saw in the 60s and 70s that the federal government played a very proactive and constructive role in the development of co-op housing, a great deal of which was built in major metropolitan areas. And I think that it was a good model. It worked. It produced good communities, and that, I hope, is going to be part of the mix that comes out of this national housing strategy. So, limited but focused on ideas that worked in the past.
Okay, let's should we put this up now? Sheldon, we'll do this graphic board number 1 here, because as we suggested, the provincial government is mostly responsible for housing policy in the province. And here's some things they've just announced. This is the Ontario government. They're going to double the land transfer tax rebate for first-time home buyers from $2,000 to $4,000. They will make up that lost revenue by raising the land transfer tax on homes that sell for $2 million and up. And I got news for you, there are more of those in Toronto these days than ever before. They are also going to freeze the tax on multi-residential properties, such as apartments. They're going to collect data on an owner's nationality, the property type, and whether the property is being used as a rental. And they're going to increase the provincial land tax. Let me go to that second last one there for a second. Cynthia, collecting data on an owner's nationality, property type, and whether the property is being used as a rental. What do we think about that?
That one thrills me. As an academic trying to conduct research on the Canadian housing market, data is very difficult to come by in Canada. We don't know what proportion of houses are purchased by foreign nationals. We don't know what proportion are rentals.
What difference does it make?
It makes a difference in the sense that we want to set policy that responds to our needs. And if we aren't documenting what our needs are or what proportions, then we can't move forward in that way.
It matters who lives in the home?
I think that the reason that foreign nationals matter is that it is important to understand where cash flow is coming from. Whether we have the new housing that's being built, is it serving our local community or is it serving as an investment vehicle for some large investor who's foreign? And the reason that we care about that is to understand whether we need to create more housing to serve our community and how we want to direct our housing resources.
Joe, if the idea behind doubling the land transfer tax rebate for first-time homebuyers is to make it easier for first-time homebuyers, how much impact will this have?
That's a great question. I guess from the government's data, they believe it will help first-time homebuyers save a little more for their down payment.
$2,000 to $4,000 as a rebate? Is that going to make any difference on a house costing $500,000?
On the new housing side, the reality is a lot of those first-time homebuyers are not in our marketplace. They're not going to be able to afford ground-related housing, at least. On the condominium side, there might be something there that they're available to get to from a market standpoint. Look, I think the government focused on a very specific part of the market they wanted to help. They've done that, obviously. They've balanced that with other changes, as you can see from that list, in terms of trying to balance out the fiscal impact of that decision. I think what's interesting is that, this really speaks to the demand side of the equation from a market standpoint, but we're still struggling with the supply side. And we'll continue to struggle with that supply side until we have a better understanding of what we need to bring to the marketplace. The one thing that we get distracted from is the reality that it is a growing region. 100,000 people a year come here. There's huge foreign investment coming in here in terms of job creation. Provincial government is always celebrating those investments. And so understanding that, we should not be surprised by the need to bring more housing onto the marketplace. And I'll say again, you can't regulate affordability. You've got to work with the marketplace. You've got to work with everyone in the sector. The one thing I will say about the federal government's strategy is, again, it's focused on partnerships, which is great. It does ask everyone to bring to the table their tools. Municipalities got to bring their zoning powers. The province has to bring their policy levers. The federal government needs to bring in their policies as well. But the one piece here that we keep missing out on is there's lots of government-owned land at different levels. So if the outcome is to try to bring forward more affordable housing, however the government wants to define that, they have their own set of assets to bring to the table, and that should be part of the discussion.
Let me ask Pino about this new package of measures here the Ontario government has introduced. What do you think it'll do?
I think it'll, at the margins, help people who are already looking to buy homes have a home that's a bit more affordable, especially with the land transfer tax rebate. It is a small amount. It's not going to solve very many issues. It's not going to help people who aren't able to afford a home today really be able to afford one. I think there is no single solution, however. So one of the positive takes is there's a menu of options that are starting to come to the table. There are policies that are starting to be looked at, and we need to look at how to expand that. So,
well, that's their list.
Yeah.
What would be on your list?
I mean, the biggest on the list is new programs again, and looking kind of back at empirical evidence around what programs have created good housing in the past. And John talked about probably the most successful one we've had in Canada, which has been the federal government's participation in the creation of nonprofit housing sector. So if there's a way to strengthen that, and that sector or that growing sector can work with home builders to actually build the kind of housing we need, the diversity of housing, and then most importantly, actually have the programs in place on a year-by-year and annual basis that allow people to afford living in those places.
Is there something, John, on this list that isn't there? Excuse me. Is there something not on this list you think should be there?
Well, let me just say this about the $4,000 rebate. That's a political gesture to a certain demographic, and I think it's not significant in any way as an effective policy
Which
tool.
demographic is it pandering to?
Well, it's to young families who are trying to get a foothold in the market, right? I mean, it's a political target market. I think that a really important move would be there are two. One is to kind of level the playing field in terms of property taxes for multi-unit residential buildings, because they pay, in Toronto, 3 times as much property tax as a single family. I mean, these are homes for people. I mean, they condominiums pay, the residential rate, multi-unit, purpose-built rental buildings pay 3 times that. So that's a disincentive for people who want to invest in those kind of buildings. The other is that that the provincial government is in this process of, changing the land use around the Greater Toronto Area and the places to grow ag. And I believe that they could be more assertive in promoting the development of multi-unit residential rental buildings, and reward developers for doing that kind of project as opposed to a condominium project, 50 to 75% of which will end up being rented. But the purpose-built rental buildings, they're better buildings, they're better built, they're professionally managed, they're better places to live.
Pino, let me try this with you. I think it's irrefutable that 50 years ago, every young family wanted to live in a single-family dwelling with a garage and a driveway and a picket fence and a backyard, period, full stop. Is that still the expectation for young families today?
No, it's that ideal is not the expectation. I think home ownership probably still is a large expectation, and it's not just young people growing up here that have that expectation. It's a lot of the newcomers. I've done lots of work in different areas of the GTA where there are newcomer groups that have been here for a few years, and they are actually looking to home ownership. The key is really understanding and working with some of the intensification policies that the province has put forward, and actually finding ways in multi-unit buildings, whether they're purpose rental or whether they're ownership units, to actually make them easier to raise children and have families. And that is a whole range of suites, and we're doing a study for the City of Toronto looking at what some of those things could be, and then how the regulators and the development industry can work together to actually provide them.
Well, Joe, this is where the rubber hits the road, right? Because if you've got this 50-year-long or maybe century-long dream that young families have to have their own home with the backyard and the picket fence and so on, but you've got planners and forgive me, academics saying, wait a second, it's all about intensification now, and you should be happy living in a 6-story apartment building at some busier intersection in Toronto. Yep. What happens when that confrontation happens?
Well, look, I'm going to point back to the marketplace over the last 10 years. I mean, we've seen a real move from a planning perspective on compacted communities, and so whatever becomes available from a ground-related low-rise perspective is priced to the market premium.
But what do your customers want?
Oh, make no mistake about it, when a new home builder opens up a subdivision in Markham, they're selling out very, very quickly because people are lining up to buy the last home built in Markham. That is sort of the market mindset. And so we're still seeing people line up. We're still seeing people. There's a lot of what we call love capital, mom and dad chipping in to help that family put down that down payment. So we're still seeing that in the marketplace. Is there going to be a shift over time? I think that shift is a combination of a number of things. It's a shift in terms of our own lifestyles. Many people are starting their families later in their lives as well. They're enjoying an urban lifestyle. Where do they work? That seems to be a piece that we keep forgetting about. If you're working in a suburban environment, the expectation is to live in a compact community, but where? Where you find this community?
Let me get Pino and then Cynthia on this issue of how do you change the culture so that young families find it just as appealing to live in an intensified urban neighborhood rather than in a sprawling suburb?
I think the culture's changed, and actually young families do want that kind of environment. I think the problem is not that, the problem is actually a supply problem, is we do not have family-friendly housing in our condominium buildings or our purpose-built rental, new purpose-built rental, because the development industry hasn't figured out how to do it yet, and has been reliant just on past history on providing ground-related housing and greenfield development. And that supply is shrinking. You're seeing that in rising housing costs. And what we haven't seen is then the increase in supply through intensification of actually better housing for families and better housing for people with a range of income needs.
Cynthia, has the change of culture, of mindset happened yet?
I think it is happening. My students all expect to live in a condo when they graduate, for example. I think, as a starting point, I think that we can look to cities like New York, London, and Paris and other world cities, as Toronto is becoming a world city, to see about how does a big world city house its families, and how do we, what lessons can we learn from these other cities? So I think there's valuable information there.
Your students expect to live in condominiums for a while.
I poll them,
Right.
and so they all expect to work downtown and live in a condo downtown, and then they expect, to get married and have children, and then move to a ground-based house.
See, that's still the expectation, isn't it?
I believe that is still the expectation. Yes.
So get to it, Joe.
Well, I mean, one of our challenges is even when we're trying to bring in ground-related housing in an intensified environment, we're still finding challenges. I mean, the urban townhouse is sort of the form that's finding its way in the city, and there are many, many neighborhoods who are enjoying $2 million neighborhoods who do not want to see $35, $500,000 townhouses go up. And so you're going to have these struggles as you try to find the right place for those kind of family-friendly opportunities. And then the second part of it is ensuring that there's a school system in place, because a lot of these neighborhoods, what we're seeing now, that people are not, there was this belief, empty nesters would move out of their homes. Those homes will become available for the next generation of families. That's not what's happening. People are staying in their homes. They're renovating their homes for the second part of their lives. And so what were typically your turnover communities with good schools in the neighborhood have now become older communities, established neighborhoods, as we like to say, and they're not operating those housing options. So now when you try to bring in new development to those communities, those residents who've been there for 30, 40, 50 years are very, very clear. This is not going to be in my neighborhood.
John, I'll give you a sign of the times. I mean, you probably know the former Petrocan station that was at Jarvis and Dundas that they've taken down. They're putting up a condo there now, and there's a sign out front saying, if you buy here, just so you know, there's no schools in the area. You're going to have to bus your kids wherever they go. It's a sign of the times, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, those are not, those signs have been going up in Toronto for a long time. I just want to make a point about the last comment, which is that in a city like Toronto, half the residents in the city rent, and many of those are families with children. So we know that people live in high rises, have lived in high rises for many years, and those expectations are completely different than the expectations of people with means. So, again, it's a question. I mean, we keep saying this. It is a question of supply and providing the right supply that meets needs of young families, for example, who may not be able to, find the down payment.
Okay, we got a couple of minutes left here for let's talk rental. If you wanted to, there's people in this town today, with people in cities all over Ontario who say if you really want to make apartments affordable, put strict rent controls back on. What do you think of that idea?
Well, rent controls, rent controls for the individual tenant are helpful in terms of their personal finances. I mean, at the industry level, it was very damaging to investment when they came in the 1970s. And so part of the shortage of rental housing in Ontario at the moment is as a result of the fact that the rent controls basically came in at a time when there were very high rents, and it sort of killed the market. So I think you have to be very careful with that policy. I think you have to look at opportunities that that are easy. Like I spoke to a developer earlier this week who's building on the vacant land in the area, that's owned by by a developer or by a property owner that has 3 large apartment buildings that date to the 60s. He's filling that land full of townhouses that are going to be rented, 2 and 3 bedrooms. They're less expensive because the land has been paid for. So there are ways of kind of looking, getting past the supply issues, and then you get to better cost structures.
Okay, let me save a minute here for Cynthia. You talked already about a shelter allowance to help make renting more affordable. What about rent controls? Hard caps on rents. What do you think?
I think that, as you said, it does have strong benefits for the family that is in there, but it does have the unintended consequence of having the landlords less willing to build rental if they're not going to be able to raise their prices.
If there's strict controls on, Joe, will a developer ever build another rental accommodation building in the province?
Well, we've already seen this played out before, right? Rent controls came in and that segment of the housing supply chain shut down. And I think that's the reality. What I prefer to talk about is the partnership. If you want to bring more rental to your community, how do we do it as a group? How does a municipality make the zoning quicker, faster, better, so we can get to the where, the what, and the when? And then more importantly, there's a role here for the federal government. I mean, they did campaign on making tax adjustments to the way that rental housing is dealt with from a construction standpoint. And that's really encouraging. We want to see that supply come on. But I mean, rent controls only serve the benefit of the tenants who have a unit. For those people looking for
Doesn't help
units,
those who don't.
we're not going to build anymore.
Right.
I mean,
Okay, I got to bring the gavel down here. Can I thank everybody for a good discussion on some idea? We should reconvene this in a year's time on next year's National Housing Day. John Lawrence, Spacing Magazine, Pino Damasio, Urban Strategies, Joe Vaccaro from the Ontario Home Builders Association, Cynthia Holmes, great name, Ryerson University. Thanks, everybody.
thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.